I'm happy to introduce some folks to continue the discussion on rights management with a talk specifically about rights management best practices. We've got Matt Bricker, who is the CTO of Rightsline, who will be moderating our discussion today. Joining Matt are Paul Charron, Operations Program Manager at Google, Tony Huidor, who is the Senior Vice President of Product and Technology and the GM of Digital Networks at Cinedigm, Tony Vassiliadis, who is the COO of MarVista Entertainment, and Richard Wolff, CEO of Breaking Glass Pictures. Gentlemen, welcome. I think we might be missing one of you. I will go see if I can find that one, and we'll let y'all get started. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Eric. Well, thanks for everyone attending. We appreciate it, and thanks again to the panelists. So, as Eric mentioned, this is a panel about rights management best practices, so expanding our view into distribution rights, not just focused on avails, although obviously the two are related. So we're going to be taking a little bit of a step back and looking at the larger process around rights management. I just wanted to take a couple minutes for each of the panelists to expand upon their role, their experience with rights management, quickly as by way of intro, and then we'll dive into some sort of sweeping topics and some specific ones as well. So Paul, why don't you kick us off? Just give us a couple minutes about exactly what your role is and your experience with rights management.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Paul Charron. I currently work as an operations program manager over at Google, operating the Google Play Store, which is transactional video on demand as well as EST. I've only been there less than 6 months right now, but before that I had a long stint in many of the studios, including Sony Pictures, NBCU, Fox, as well as Paramount. So each one of those roles was very tied to rights management and overall distribution of content. So I've seen quite the gamut of everything from avails creation all the way to distribution, and know that rights management is definitely what drives a lot of that. So looking forward to answering some questions today.
Great, thanks so much. Tony H., why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes, thank you. I head up product and technology for Cinedigm. We're the largest independent studio out there. I'm also general manager of our digital networks group, where we oversee the development and launch of several owned and operated OTT channels, as well as various others that we distribute. We manage, 30,000 plus titles in our catalog. We distribute that content across really every format, every digital format out there, from TVOD, AVOD, SVOD, linear, as well as apps. So pretty much covers the entire gamut. In addition, we've developed a platform called Matchpoint, which automates the content ingestion and delivery of our assets across all digital and OTT distribution platforms. So it's really allowed us to scale. And prior to this, I was at Universal Music Group for 8 years and at Walt Disney Internet Group for 8 years.
Excellent, thank you. Tony V.
Hi, everyone. So I'm at CEO at MarVista Entertainment. Essentially, my role there is kind of looking across both the operations as well as the production side, and then also the business development side. So at MarVista, we're a pretty high volume production shop. We make over 60 original films a year, and then distribute all of them worldwide as well. So where rights management has really made a big impact for us is kind of looking at where can we find additional value for our catalog, and how do we continue to look at new ways we can partner with different companies, different content creators out there, different content consumers out there. We've created this concept of studio as a platform where we understand we have development, production, and distribution capabilities in-house, and trying to figure out different and unique ways to partner with different companies in order to deploy any set of capabilities across that to kind of find unique ways to monetize content in today's environment as an independent.
Excellent, excellent. And finally, Rich. You're on mute, Rich.
Hi, my name's Rich Wolff. I'm the CEO of Breaking Glass Pictures. We're based in Philadelphia. The company distributes about 50 movies a year. We have a catalog Of about 500 titles, and we aggregate for a few other companies. So I've been in the industry a long time, and it used to be a lot simpler. You delivered to, you had stores, you had, your broadcast. Now, jumping, 15 years later, it's becoming, a bit of a challenge for us with 500 titles. We should be managing more like 750 by the end of the year. And we've kind of become a delivery and rights management company more than the guys who would go to every festival and, just watch movies and buy a couple. So, my role's changed, our company's changed quite a bit. And I look forward to kind of doing it better and learning, from people on the panel and all, how we can be more efficient.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you guys for the intro. It's a good, diverse group in terms of experience. I would encourage all the attendees to remember to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom if you want to ask some questions. And Eric and I will be kind of compiling those, and we'll save some time at the end to address those questions. So kind of diving right in, the first thing I want to ask, obviously my experience as CTO of Rightsline, we do a lot of rights management implementations. And I'm just curious from each of your perspective, if you're going to undergo a rights management initiative. Now that might be implementing a full new platform. It might be onboarding a new internal group. Maybe you do a library purchase and you need to integrate that content. Or you're just trying to do a reporting initiative, something where rights management is a central component. What is the first thing that comes to mind in terms of an important consideration or something maybe to avoid a gotcha? Like what is top of mind if you're going to, undergo a large rights management initiative? I'll throw it out there and kind of see what your guys' reactions are. I'm very curious, and I'm sure the attendees are as well.
Yeah, this is Tony. I think from our perspective, it's first of all, getting the contracts in order. We have agreements that go back 10, 15 years. Many of them weren't digitized. So having to dig up all the contracts and getting them into normalizing them. Every contract is different. One of the things that, we struggled with is we didn't have a consistent template for all our distribution agreements. And, we are a client of Rightsline, but before we could even start working on getting our content into Rightsline, we had to go through boxes or just reams of digital files and getting every contract into a consistent format so that we can transfer and store all the terms of the deal into the platform. That probably took us 9-12 months. Just the scope of that was significant, and it's not easy to do if there isn't that driving force that it was mentioned earlier in the earlier panel. There's got to be a need that's going to drive this, otherwise it won't ever get done.
And Tony, I think you bring up a great point there. I would add to that you kind of really need to be flexible as well, because while going back in time to make everything normal right now is only good for right now. And if you are locked into some sort of static place, then you're not going to be able to grow as the business grows. I've seen examples of that where, we didn't have SVOD rights, or we didn't, all these new kind of medias, AVOD, everything that was kind of going on was not thought up. And so the challenge becomes, how do you keep, how do you put a square peg into a round hole, or how do you change your system later on to work with the business? And that might be even more painful than going back and adjusting everything that you did in the previous iteration.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the biggest things is thinking about how do you want to use your rights management system to foster collaboration. I think what I heard from both Tony and Paul is really about kind of the evolution of the business and how, rights are having more and more of an impact on decision making. And you want to be thinking about who do you want to be maybe engaging with rights in the future. For us, when we wanted to pick out a new rights management system, what it really came down to was finding a workflow tool that can work and engage people across different departments. So people who had never even really come across the concept of a right before, we thought down the road, we're going to need them to be involved in understanding how a project develops over time, what rights are available, how does that impact the sales cycle, both from the creative side as well as from the finished film side. So I would say, think about who do you want to eventually engage in your rights management system, and what information might be vital to them, and how are they keeping that today? I think what's also interesting is, in smaller companies, people aren't really working with a lot of systems, and you pretty much eventually at a certain point of size need a rights management system. So how do you say to someone, hey, you're doing this off in a spreadsheet, or you're keeping an email that you're just adding to each day? Could we leverage this rights management system to help you house some of that information? And you can kind of pick up collaborators and people to engage with rights along the way, which will only make better decision making, I think, from everyone in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important concept, is that concept of collaboration that you guys all alluded to, and sort of the democratization of data that we're seeing, across the industry in general. But maybe talk a little bit about how you're distributing that data, or encouraging that shared ownership, or really making processes that might not have been historically rights enabled, so to speak, in terms of injecting that rights data both upstream and downstream of the core rights management function, to encourage those users to take ownership of that data and use it in novel ways. Maybe talk just a little bit about your guys' experience, challenges, successes with getting people that aren't familiar with rights management data to really embrace that concept and see the value. Maybe we can start with Rich. As you were saying, you guys are growing really rapidly. The business has changed a lot. What are your experiences with collaboration and getting people to embrace rights management as, a core, traditionally, non-rights processes?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Where we're at right now is we're still using the spreadsheets and things like that. And we also have an international sales catalog with about 150 titles in it. So we're hitting a crossroads that it's, do we need to, go to the next level, and how complicated and time consuming that's going to be. So it's like, so we're kind of, we have a smaller catalog than many of you. So we're not sure how to, how to address it and whom to address it with. We've had, from where we sit, how do you know what the best system is? And there's lots of companies approaching us, and we've, gone to the edge a few times, and then we go back into our comfort zone and, do things as we have. But we realize that we need to, especially with the international deals. I'm doing like output deals in Brazil, and we're doing things in different countries, and it gets a little complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to that, Rich, it's, I think that transition from going to how things used to be to how things need to be is one of the hardest things, to your point, understanding the complexity. And what you're going to find is being in entertainment is no longer the way it used to be, because entertainment now is, there's so many different types of formats and so many rights. And when you add international, it just grows exponentially. But ultimately, you can't reach automation without having rights digitized. You need all that in a system or a platform where it flows through the entire workflow. As I mentioned, we developed a platform called Matchpoint for digital delivery. It has no value to me if I can't ingest the rights in an automated fashion. The days if you're using a spreadsheet to communicate rights, you're not doing it right. There's better ways of doing that. As was mentioned in the earlier EMA panel, the EMA spec is intended to facilitate communication and make things flow more quickly through a company. For us, the minute we have a deal done, we digitize the rights. It flows into marketing. From marketing, it flows into placing an order for delivery. The production team takes that order. They process that order. So all that is done, programmatically through having systems talk to each other, machine to machine. And that automates a process, to your point, which is highly painful. It's very time extensive, very human labor extensive. So there's things that can be done to automate that process, but it all starts with having your rights in a central repository. I was at Universal Music for 8 years, and in the days of early days of digital and mobile, and our catalog was 500,000 songs, everyone with different rights. There's no way to scale that business if you don't have the ability to automate the ingestion and delivery of that rights information?
Yeah, for us, I feel like we're kind of in between where you guys are at, Rich and Tony, where we've got, you know, a catalog of maybe 1,000, 1,500 different titles, some degree of automation, but not a lot, with kind of a roadmap of how we want to get there. So I think one of the important things is just kind of mapping out what are the different scenarios or processes that you expect. We've spent a lot of time just building out internal playbooks where we kind of have outlined generally what we see as the process, and then creating some rigor around how data is entered into systems, because, you know, to get to where you guys are at, Tony, you know, you need to have that data consistency and that single source of truth. It's probably easier to enforce that if there's a high degree of automation, and we still have, you know, some manual steps in our process. And so we also have to go back and do audits against the data regularly. So we have a data analyst that kind of goes through and just makes sure that you know, the right data is being entered, identifying if maybe certain people are continuing to be challenged with something, with consistently entering in things, so we can kind of train and maybe create more rigor and structure around that. The other thing, you know, to go back to your question, Matt, around the how we're creating these processes, the other thing we did when we actually looked for a rights management system, we also considered, you know, Salesforce.com. We thought rights management is so closely tied to the sales process. How do we create steps in the sales process that's automated or that's structured and that feeds into the rights management process? And we actually ended up building out our kind of a sales pipeline module into our rights management system to be able to then trigger events based on the sales process. So whereas sometimes, you know, we used to be very passive and reactive about rights, where we just enter them in once a deal is done. Now we kind of watch a deal get built up over time. We understand how different rights are getting attached to that deal, notifying people along the way. So once the deal is executed, we can move quickly in terms of delivery. We can understand what inventory we have against that. And then also creating a live link to our finance team. We deployed an enterprise performance management software there. Basically, it's like a spreadsheet in the cloud that is linking live to our rights management system. So we're understanding what's the forecast impact of our rights sales. We sold this right for more or less than we thought, and what's that going to actually mean at the end of the year, so that we can have a little bit of a live link to our financial systems and to our library evaluation work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that when you guys are talking about automation and workflow and getting that rights information into different areas of the organization, I'm curious, do you see a granularity issue? Obviously, rights management experts on a business legal affairs team or a sales team are going to be really well versed in that terminology and the details of the data. But if you're talking about federating that data into a financial function or a delivery function where rights management is critical for automation, but maybe that detail isn't necessary, I wonder if you guys could touch a little bit on, you know, how you expose or that view of rights management data would look like kind of outside of the core rights management function in terms of granularity or summarization. Talk a little bit about that to make that data more approachable or specific to a use case.
Hey, Matt, it's Paul. No, I was just going to say, yeah, you bring up a great point there, that there's a lot of people that sort of get involved with rights. The first rights are going to be negotiated with talent for production, and, you know, we're going to effectively be acquiring rights for money, and we're going to have this inventory of rights that we can sell. So kind of to Tony's point about how do you value those, that starts to become a question, and it requires, to your point, a lot of granularity to be able to understand where the value is for what you paid for them. Further down the line, you get to a point where you start distributing, and we see this a lot in the retail space, where we'll look across a title and we'll understand that only 70% of all of the rights in the world are exploited. So, you know, there's opportunity there where somebody may own the rights and they may not be exploiting them. On the other side, they may be exploiting them somewhere else, and that value may actually be higher than what they could have brought in at our retailer. Only the rights holder would know that and be able to make that that connection there. So it's imperative that you have a great view of what rights you own, what rights you've sold, and at what value they are, so that not only can you know how much revenue you've made, but also so you can project how much things are worth. And it helps you, I think, make decisions in Richard's business here, where he's going out to buy more content. That kind of information is absolutely critical to know what we've sold something for, so that we can project what something might be worth when we go to the open market to buy it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think connecting rights and historical, both acquisition and distribution information, to the value of those rights for content valuing is a really important part of any successful rights management strategy. I don't know, Tony and Tony, do you guys are doing any content value management stuff around the rights? I mean, you talked a little bit about that, Tony V, with the thing you're doing with the spreadsheet in the cloud and connecting to projections, but maybe, talk a little bit on the production side, how that rights management, and some best practices around connecting that to actually valuing whether or not a piece of content gets greenlit or and influences the budget process from a production standpoint.
Yeah, so for us, a big part of what we want to do is create some degree of ownership and accountability around this information. So it's great to have all the information in the system, but if people are just blindly putting it in and then they have no responsibility for either checking in on it or actually understanding what it means, it's not really effective. So I think if we're stepping back and talking back about a little bit about the system implementation piece, this idea of ownership and accountability of information in the system also really matters to get that commitment up front. And we have now actually launched the rights management system across our creative and production team, and really using it there, as a starting point. It was, hey, how can we use this as a way to be helpful to what you guys are doing? You guys are out pitching all over town to different networks, different buyers, different co-production partners. Let's house that information somewhere. And that was a little bit of a Trojan horse to get a group that is not typically using a rights management system to start using it. Now we're layering in a little bit and asking some more questions, like what kind of rights is this buyer going to be looking for? What kind of rights are going to be available? Now that it's in a system, once it gets to a certain point of pitching, I can make it visible to my RevOps team and my sales team, so they can start to see this content is starting to pick up some speed or some steam. Customers are getting interested in pre-buying this. These are the rights that'll still be available. So it actually, just having the information there and letting people know this is where you can go see it, this is what this stage means. So once it gets past the pitch stage to the high interest stage, this is a project that might materialize. Then people can start to engage on the creative and start to actually put some thought into that. So then by the time we're bringing people together, in advance of our Greenlight meeting, you've already had people start to socialize it. You've already started to create that connection. It doesn't need to be, two managers need to get together and say and assign this work to people. It starts to become a little bit more organic, and conversations can start happening directly with people. So it's actually a little bit of the power it creates outside of the system, just by creating visibility and understanding of how a project is developing and what rights are still available. That then, if the sales team sees it and no rights are going to be available because it's going to be mostly, a production only deal, they're not going to spend time on it. If they're going to see it's a piece of creative that is pretty unique and compelling and might really create value, maybe on AVOD, maybe in some European territories, then they can start engaging on it. So I think just creating that visibility and understanding for people is what creates a lot of power for that type of conversation.
Absolutely. I'm curious, as you either boot up a new system or are in the market for a new system, like somebody in Rich's shoes, or as the industry changes and you say new modes of VOD come online, are you guys still having issues with internal vocabulary? Something that we see a lot in our implementations is just the age-old problem of rationalizing your territory and your media hierarchy so that everybody internal to the organization knows, say, what AVOD means, or defining things the same way. And then that conversation obviously becomes even more difficult when you're talking about your partners that you're buying content from or selling to, because there hasn't been sort of the full-scale adoption of ISO or other standards for media and territory hierarchies specifically. But I'm wondering, in the context of those rights dimensions, or other types of data, if that is still an ongoing struggle, or if that's something that you kind of solved once when you put a system in place. Maybe you guys can just touch a little bit on kind of that mapping exercise and how much pain that causes as the industry shifts, and some thoughts around how to tackle that, because I know that's a big part of any of our implementations that people have been struggling with for almost 10 years. Tony H., you got some thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's a good example. I think live linear is one example where all our contracts are very specific about SVOD, AVOD, TVOD. Linear isn't a right that has traditionally been defined in any agreements. So for us, having the ability to easily query our systems for anything that's ad supported. What we're seeing in the industry is sort of adoption as AVOD covering linear. So that's allowed us to enter a new business more easily than in the past. We would have been frozen if everything was on paper or we didn't have a way to easily get access to the rights. It really prevented us from entering new types of businesses. We've seen tremendous growth on the AVOD linear side of the business. So it would have been a big lost opportunity had we not really been prepared by having all our rights digitized.
Great. Paul, you guys experiencing any of that at Google with the kind of volume of data that you have and the level of automation that is always the standard there?
Yeah, the controlled vocabulary has to be one of you bring up, it's a great problem there. And to the earlier panel about avails really driving this, at least that starts to put that vocabulary into a standardized format that we can all use. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room to grow there, to be frank, and we almost need something that would govern the vocabulary there, but agreeing on one thing is probably going to be very difficult. So I'm hopeful, but yeah, until we get that controlled vocabulary there, it becomes everything's a snowflake problem.
Tony V or Rich, you guys have any thoughts there? Or you maybe talk about what is a barrier to adoption of a standard? Is it just you're still doing a mapping from a standard back to your internal vocabulary? Like, where do you see this going? You guys are obviously at different kind of points in the rights management lifecycle. Rich, you got some thoughts first, and then Tony?
Yeah, let Tony go first. I want to think about this.
I think for us, the transition was hard. So, for a long time, we didn't go to a certain level of detail in terms of how we were managing our rights. And then as we went through the journey of bringing in new rights management system, we brought in some consultants as well and just said, okay, let's get to our standard set of rights that we're going to use so that we can actually create some clarity for ourselves. And actually, if you don't do that, you can't start to automate things. You can't, like, Tony was saying, you can't really look across and say what's going on across all my advertising supported content. So for us, the transition was super, super hard. Once we committed to it and said, look, everything has to go and be entered into the system under one of these internal choices, then you kind of map as you go. And eventually, and I think this was also in a time where a lot of digital rights were just emerging and being defined. And now at least there's a little bit more history of that. So I don't see it as a problem for us right now. The switchover was a huge problem. It took probably 18 months to go through things, and we had to make some choices on certain rights and also let some deals expire because they were very confusing and just not deal with them. And in many cases, what we ended up doing was just being overly cautious and saying, okay, if this right could be this or could be that, let's check off both and not take any chances and let this deal expire and then clean it up from there.
Interesting. Rich, got some thoughts?
So when we license product, we generally almost always get all rights. So we get 100% of the rights. Since late last year, Q3, Q4, we've been onboarding with the Tubies and the Zumos, and we started with Peacock and with a host of others that are coming in. So we haven't really had the luxury of sitting back and thinking, like, I won't call it management by chaos, but it's like we deliver in-house also to a lot of platforms. So with the pandemic, I have 2 full-time delivery people and support from there. So it's kind of I'll call it winging it, but it's I hope nobody gets the virus and can't come into work. So we're using a small staff for delivering thousands of units in total. So it's kind of stretched right now. So like having 18 months kind of implement something, if the process takes that long, probably much shorter, you know, for a catalog of 500 to 700 titles. Just really haven't had the luxury of time, and I'm not sure how soon things will be back to normal and I'll have, you know, a full staff in the office. So kind of
and that's an interesting point. Maybe let's explore that a bit. I mean, the sort of the impacts of COVID aside, Tony, what would you say to somebody that's in Rich's position or someone in the audience if they say, hey, look, I'd love to do that, but maybe we don't have the time because we're running at breakneck pace. Like, how can we prioritize certain things in a rights management implementation to get the ball rolling, either to set yourself up for success in the eventual implementation or to actually take the first couple of steps? How did you guys approach that? And if you were sort of strapped for time and resources, looking back on what went well and what didn't, what would you prioritize as a first step?
Yeah, what Tony said earlier at the very beginning was really important. It's the cleanup effort as you go into this is what's really daunting. Taking on the cleanup initiative is going to take a period of time. It's going to take effort. But every day you wait is just more contracts piling up that you'll need to clean up later. So, you know, if you can't take on the effort of doing the implementation yet, at least do the scoping for yourself now. That's pretty easy to do. And you can say, this is what I'd like it to look like. This is how I want to start to create standardization. So at least the work you do from now going forward can be in that standard template. You'll do two things with that. One, everything you're doing from this point on will be in that, will be ready to be implemented much easier. It won't need to get cleaned up. And then second, you'll find out what's the pros and cons of the way you've decided to do that. You may say, hey, this way that I thought I could create this field and just have yes or no, I actually need a maybe, or something. You know, I'm generalizing here. But you'll actually be able to test out what your standardization process is and fine tune that. So at the point you get to actually implementing, everything you've done from today on will be, you know, pretty turnkey, and you'll probably fine tune what your setup is going to look like. The other thing I'll say, and maybe this time period of the quarantine has passed, but what I saw early on in the quarantine was a couple of things. One is people's jobs were really turned upside down. Some people were way busier in some of their work, and other people couldn't do their job with the level of shutdown that there was. And the other thing you saw was a huge just commitment and goodwill from people to say, how can I help build? How can I help the company right now? Because we're all in a tough position. So for the first 2 months of the quarantine, I would say about a third of our staff kind of shifted their focus to really internally focused projects to kind of get things in order, to kind of set up for the future. And I think doing that, especially at a time like this where you're working with leaner staffs, people have to do more with less, systems, automation, standard process, those all just streamline things. So, you know, to the degree you can do that, it will pay off for you once you're kind of on the other side of that, and you'll find those efficiencies.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think as Tony mentioned, it's that initial inertia of like, oh my God, this is so much. Where do I start? I don't know where I start, and things don't change. I think the reason it takes 18 months plus is everyone is now doing two jobs. They're doing the regular job and they're preparing for their next job or how their job is going to change. I'm a big believer in a hit by the bus strategy. If one of my guys gets hit, doesn't make it to work, I'm screwed. So it's important that there's always a plan forward on how the business can continue. If someone disappears, doesn't make it to work, quits or leaves, becoming entirely dependent on human capital is risky. So for us, you know, it's, as much as my team hated it, they complained and griped about having to do more of what they used to do. Ultimately, they look back now and their jobs are much easier because they're not in the weeds, you know, changing file names, delivering stuff to FTP. All that's been automated. And just overcoming that initial inertia of not being able to tackle something because you see it as too big is part of the problem. Doing it in phases, do cleanup, you know, as Tony mentioned, and then do it in chunks and set aside time to get these things done. And over time, you'll realize that all that work that you've put in makes you more efficient. It gets your house in order, and it makes it easier to implement or add an additional system into your workflow that's going to help you really scale the business. And the challenge with OTT is it's highly complex. You're delivering to tons of platforms, tons of different specs, tons of metadata, different specs for everything. And the only way you can get that is through some form of automation or using a system or a platform to help you do what humans currently do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good segue into another topic that I wanted to address, which Armand on the previous panel touched on as well, is that balance between automation and control, right? So we over-automate something, especially in a new part of an industry that is changing, you might lose a little bit of control and visibility. And I think you guys are all kind of coming at the automation from a different perspective or maybe a different point in that life cycle. And just like to kind of hear about your thoughts on balancing automation with control, and how do you decide when to automate something, how much to automate, and what goes into those decisions to ultimately get to a place where you have everything as automated as it can be, while you still have the proper visibility and control to handle exceptions, or again, the sort of changing sands of a burgeoning aspect of the industry. Maybe we'll start with Paul. Obviously, coming from Google, automation there is kind of a key ethos. And then go around the horn and just kind of hear everybody's experience with that.
Yeah, so at Google, we're always thinking about how to scale things. And we distribute currently to over 110 territories in the EST and VOD, and have just content from every provider out there. So we're constantly thinking about scale and how do we do this in an automated fashion. In that note, it would be great if everything was automated, but that kind of comes at a price. And I think what it really goes to is that what you really are looking to do is to automate as much as you can without losing the ground that you already had, right? You don't try to go from 0 to 100. You've got to take it incrementally, and you've got to automate what you can when you can do it. So yeah, at Google, we're always trying to push the limits on this because we have a big business and it's a big scaled business, but we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We rely on vendors, Matt knows, to help us to do this right now, but we are working with clients who can make that transition and to help us push the automation a little bit forward. So yeah, to your point about how do you balance it, I guess you do as much as you can until it breaks, and then you back it up a little bit and try again.
Yeah, I mean, from my end, I'm a big believer in automation. I don't believe there's too much automation. Clearly, entering legal information, anything that's sensitive, you can't automate. But anything that is just low level, doesn't require sort of human intervention, automate it. We built in checkpoints into our workflow. Someone has to approve the rights. Someone has to approve the metadata. Someone has to approve the delivery schedule. But everything else is automated. I could schedule something in Rightsline and have it delivered to a partner with very few people even touching that order. And for us as a small company, that's the only way we can remain competitive. We have to be ruthless in automating and eliminating people in the workflow that aren't necessary. You keep only the people that are going to be approving and managing that dashboard in order to get the content to market quickly. OTT moves quickly and it moves fast. And unlike the days of TVOD and EST where you're doing 50 deliveries a month, we're doing thousands of deliveries a month. For us to launch on Comcast, for example, I had to deliver 15,000 SKUs in 6 weeks. There's no way you can do that without some form of automation. So for us, scale and time to market is really what drives our need to automate and to reduce cost. We don't have to depend on third-party vendors. I don't have to pay, $1,500 per title to deliver it to one platform. Through automation, we're able to do a lot of that significantly less, 30% of what, retail vendors or encoding houses charge you. So for us, that's really the only way that we've been able to remain competitive and be in a market and be ubiquitous. Our channels are available on every streaming platform, whether it's AVOD, TVOD, SVOD, linear, and that's all been because we have the tools now to get to market at scale without having to invest in significant amount of headcount or third-party vendor fees on getting your content to market.
Yeah, so for us, I hear the way Paul and Tony are talking, and I wish we could automate more, or we have automated more. I think one of our challenges is 2/3 of our staff is creative and production team. So when we talk about the distribution side or the operations side, there we do really look to automate and have automated a decent amount. On the creative and production side, really, the way I've looked to bring those teams on board into engaging in our rights management system, since every single person at MarVista has some use of our rights management system and some responsibility to enter information into the rights management system. But we really talk about process in the service of creative. And there it's really finding that right balance of, finding where that comfort level is from the creative team to see automation. And right now, that comfort level is not very high, nor, are there a lot of applications for automation there, since projects tend to be pretty customized. So really it's about tailoring it to the situation and thinking about, as Paul said, how much can I automate before I start to risk adoption, before I start to risk, people using this system, before people start to push back. So a lot of this, when you think about, moving to some of these systems and moving to more automation, it's a change management approach. And it's how are you engaging people in that process? How are you getting them to buy into it? How are you helping them see what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like of, yeah, if I commit to this automation and I feel like I'm losing some control, but it allows me to step out of day-to-day data processing and more, makes my job higher level and my job more interesting. And I think that's the way to get there. But for us, I think everything starts and stops with change management and driving adoption of the tools. And if automation actually creates worse adoption, you probably haven't found the benefits of that automation. It's going to cause more other problems. So, that's the fine balance that I think we all need to work on finding.
Absolutely. Rich, from your perspective, when you guys are thinking down the road of automating, what is the one or two things that you really, if you could automate overnight magically, what are the one or two things in your business that you would love to have automated as a wish list?
Delivery for us is challenging, especially now. Our lab's working, not at full speed. And when we're delivering, to, a lot of platforms, this is like a big time for us right now. We'll probably slow down, but we're doing our initial couple hundred deliveries to multiple platforms. It's time consuming, I'd say that's the number one headache. Besides having material failures or, sometimes we'll have 3 platforms say, yep, pass QC, iTunes being one of them, and then Amazon kicks it back. And I'm like, well, so as I mentioned before, this whole, the whole delivery is, it's challenging and it's eating up a lot of time. There sounds like there's some better processes because we do half of it in-house and half of it through a lab in LA.
Got it.
I mean, just to add to that, that was the first thing we automated, delivery, for that reason. It's very human intensive, very prone to human error. So you're going to get files failing, naming conventions wrong format for the art, wrong format, wrong size for the images. That was the first thing that we automated. And I think to Tony's point, the part that is less easy to automate is the creative side, where it's more subjective. You can't automate creative. You need a creative team involved the whole way. We've outsourced some stuff overseas. So part of us automating was also getting creative in and outsourcing low-level creative to another country where it could be done cheaper, and you can hire a team of people for the cost of one person here. So it's been a combination of automation and outsourcing.
Great. And we just got a couple minutes left here. We did get one question from the audience that maybe we can end on, is just for those of you that have started the automation or further down that path, what software or resources are a good starting point for dipping into automation? Now, I'm obviously a little bit biased, but if you guys can kind of touch on the tools in your landscape that have been helpful for automation from a workflow standpoint or a services standpoint, I think we can end on that in the next minute here.
So yeah, we've just kind of bootstrapped it a little bit. I think we don't want to maintain complex automations. We don't want to build a lot of customization. I think we're really leaning on software as a service solutions where we can leverage the work that the different softwares are doing. We just want to make sure it's customized and tailored. The automation that we are doing, I've just hired a couple CS graduates and kind of managing them to build custom automations internally using different programming languages and hosting it on our server. So it's been somewhat bootstrapped and just being, using it as proof of concept as well to then be able to go and show vendors, this is what we've built. Can you build this into your application? Because we're not at the size where we're going to support a large in-house IT team or IS team, but we're looking to make little wins here and there through this automation using just some young talented programmers.
Yeah, I mean, from our end, everything's built on AWS. So Matchpoint is a proprietary platform that we've developed over the last few years with the development team that we've been working with from India for several years. So we had a bit of a head start given that we had developed an OTT streaming platform for direct-to-consumer channels. And then we really just kind of built on top of that. We use Hybrid for transcoding. And all that is custom development API. So you essentially add on a new partner and you automate everything through Hybrid. And then you have all the orchestration and all the other things going on in the background through AWS. So a lot of, to Tony's point, a lot of it is custom code. We had back-end engineers, front-end engineers, so full stack development resources that have been working on this problem, for the last 2 years. I designed what we needed to build and they went out and built it.
Excellent. Great. Well, that's a great perspective. I think we're just right up against time here. So again, a big thank you to all four of you for participating. I think I learned a lot. I think some really interesting topics here around automation and data ownership. And it was good to kind of get a perspective from people that are on different parts of the spectrum of that rights management journey around best practices. So big thank you to the four of you. And also thank you to Eric and Steve and everyone at OTT.X for putting this together and for everyone who attended. So I think, there is a facility to ask further questions later today in the roundtable discussions, which I'll be joining as well. But yeah, just a big thank you to everyone. It was very interesting and we appreciate everyone's time. So I'll hand it back to you, Eric.
Hey, thanks a lot, Matt. Fabulous panel. It was really terrific. And I learned a new term that I'm going to use frequently, ruthless automation. Thank you, Tony, for that. I think we should all pursue that. Yeah, it's really, really valuable discussion and an important thing for everybody, no matter where you are in your scaling process. If you have aspirations to get bigger, and I assume most people do, at some point your level of automation, starting with rights, is going to inhibit your ability to do that, and it will prohibit the growth that you're aspiring to, or at least make it really, really expensive to do so. Many of us have lived through that. So as Matt mentioned, we'll have a chance to continue on and even dive deeper into this discussion, as well as our avails discussion later on today. And those will be beginning at 1, where we'll be talking about avails with Craig and the folks from Sony New Media Solutions. And at 2, well, we'll bring back the panel of folks discussing rights management. So I want to once again thank our sponsors who made the event possible for us today. Rightsline, thank you. And Sony New Media Solutions, fantastic. Really appreciate your support and your friendship to OTT.X and our community.